Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview founders in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes, get practical tips to overcoming challenges, and learn just a little bit about different tactics that we can use in our different businesses. Today we have Mark from SearchLab. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Prateek, it is good to be with you. Good to be with a friend. So looking forward to this.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. Before we jump into the business, Mark, I'd love to learn who's Mark, where did you grow up, and what really got you into entrepreneurship?
So yeah, I don't know. I grew up in Troy, Michigan. I spent a little bit of time in Naperville for fifth and sixth grade, but basically I was sort of a underachieving student. I was sort of a jock. I basically tried to do well enough in school to keep my dad off my case and to be able to play sports. Those were my two main motivations. The the way that I got into this, I just kind of muddled my way through school. I don't know how else to describe it. I kind of got good enough grades where I graduated. I finished at Michigan State, and I had an English major and no very good career paths. So I spent 1 year. I was thinking about going to law school, so that was I dodged a bullet there. And there's a good story there of like the value of having good friends. So all my best friends from high school, all their dads were lawyers, and
Oh, no way.
one of my best friends, his dad and his mom were lawyers. So I knew a lot of lawyers, and one of those dads kind of pulled me aside. It's like, if you're deciding to go to law school because it's sort of a default, like you don't have any other options, it's not that great of a career and you shouldn't do it. And so I took that pretty seriously because he nailed it. I was just doing it because it was like the default thing to do. I didn't really want to do it. And so I was sort of rudderless for a while there. And then I did a volunteer teaching year and then started in on my career. And basically I worked at a company for 18 months and then I've been on my own ever since. And it was really in that year, that volunteer year, where it became clear like I was going to do something on my own. And I definitely had sort of the telltale like entrepreneurial signs when I was a kid, like a lot of like baseball card collecting, a lot of my friend and I had this business where we would water they were building houses by us. So we'd ride our bikes and we'd water all the plants before they got put onto this house building project.
Cool.
And so I did a lot of like just kind of dumb kid stuff when I was young, like how can you make money when you're a kid?
Yeah.
And so so that was sort of my beginnings are sort of like unremarkable and mostly the story of an underachieving person. I can remember a lot of times my parents, my teachers, and everything being surprised. They'd be like, you seem like you have a lot more ability than you're displaying in school. I never remembered like enjoying school that much. By the time I got to high school, I sort of I liked certain parts about school, but I never liked class. Like I was always, and I like to learn. I like to read. I don't know why that was. It just wasn't. I have a son, and I'm kind of watching him go through it now. And I'm like, I don't think school is really designed that much for people like me. So anyway, that was a long answer to your question, but
That's awesome. Was there like a like a pivotal moment growing up where you thought that, hey, you know what, one day I could run something?
I was good at a few things. I was extrovert. I had lots of friends. So I was pretty good at, I wouldn't even say leadership necessarily. I was just good at, I was able to make relationships and I'd be friends with these people for years, and they would be pretty deep relationships. And so whatever you want to call that, like I liked making relationships with people, and that has ended up being a really big part of how I've done well. Like I think mostly early on, especially, it was just people thought I was a nice guy who would try hard, and I developed the skills over time to be pretty good at the job. But I don't know, like that there was never a moment where I go, I was 7 and I'm going to be an entrepreneur or something like that. If you asked me what I wanted to be when I was 7, I was like, I want to play college football and then pro football. I didn't.
Yeah.
This was it. So
Yeah.
I was a jock kind of a kid, and then this was sort of like when that ran out, when that dream ran out, then it was like, okay, what are you gonna do? And this was this was it. I mean, I will say a couple of things that are really important about my childhood. Now that I think about it, I'm from Detroit. If you people who are not from there, um, it's hard to describe even how it felt growing up. It felt like a city that was just declining all the time.
Okay.
And so everything was attached to the car companies. Like
Yeah.
the quote is like, if General Motors gets a cold, Detroit gets pneumonia. And it's true. Like even my dad would be like in financial services or something like that, but his by far biggest client was General Motors. If they pulled out, there's like barely a business left. And so there was a lot of stories like that. And so I just went like, I don't want to be in a place or in an industry that's declining. I really had this idea that I had to get out of there, and there was kind of a cynical attitude in Detroit, in certain ways that like it's pessimistic about things, and I just was not wired that way. I didn't want to be around it, and so I think there was something about my childhood where I was like, I know what I don't want. I
Yeah.
know what I don't. I know I don't want to work for one of these car companies, or even tangentially, and I want to get somewhere else,
Got it.
and get to where there's progress. That was about as much as I thought about it, though.
Mark, we met last year through EO, and EO has changed my life for the better in just numerous ways. You know, a lot of people say that they want to help other entrepreneurs. You are one of the few that I've met who actually do it. Why is that?
Well, I find the entrepreneurs like incredibly interesting. So I'm quoting like third hand here. My forum mate heard a podcast, and then I love this quote. And he said, the person on the podcast said, "I love talking to entrepreneurs and addicts because they always have the best stories." And I found that big like the entrepreneurs just are interesting, and I don't know how else to put it. There's EO in a lot of ways
Yeah.
has ruined conversation with my friends and neighbors for me. It really has, because there's just a lot of talk about the weather or material possessions or how how's the local football team doing or something like that. And I find when I talk to entrepreneurs, they're putting a lot on the line.
Yep.
There's a certain amount of courage that you have to do
Yep.
it. It's not easy. So it's really hard. And at the end of it, there's sort of like almost like a gallows humor. Like they've been through some stuff. There's like road rash, and I always learn more. We and I always learn more from the entrepreneurs who will be vulnerable and describe where they failed, where they screwed up, than the person who comes and goes, if you follow my 7-step process, you'll be rich or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't get a lot out of that, but I find that entrepreneurs, when you find somebody, there's sort of like a unspoken connection.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the struggle. Like you've gone through some element. I just have a mutual respect for somebody, because I'm like, well, you've gone through some stuff. Like I don't know exactly what you did, but you've gone through some stuff. It's really hard, and you're trying to take something that's zero to even make $1, is
Yeah.
hard. And so I've loved it. And then the reason I give back is just, I think I only get to live the one time, and I think they're the most interesting people. And like me, that could change, but I turned 40 a year and a half ago, and it just really occurred to me like how, the concept of time. So I really wanted to make sure I could spend my time as wisely as I can. I have kids. I have passion projects, like I like to coach football. I have this business. I have board work on EO, and I have very little time for things that aren't going to be inspiring or
Mhm.
move me in the direction I'm trying to go. And so EO and entrepreneurs generally, I'll always talk to them. I mean, I find them almost always to be interesting, and it's like you give back, but you also like I'm getting more than I'm giving.
I see that. Yeah. On that note, you have to plug in EO.
Yeah.
What is EO, and what's the accelerator program that you share?
Yep. So EO stands for Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a peer-to-peer group where we're looking to better the lives of entrepreneurs. And so there aren't very many rules in EO. but the rules that we have really are designed to make an environment that cultivates really positive peer-to-peer collaboration. So the first rule is that there's confidentiality. I tell this story to everyone. I think I probably told it to you the first time we met, but one of the things that was really hard for me in my life before I joined EO is I didn't know anybody who did what I do. None of my friends from college did. None of my family did this. I had friends from college who started a law firm. It was kind of more of like a lifestyle business than, really trying to scale a business, growth,
Yeah.
and everything.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anybody. I have like best friends, and I would talk to them about, I have my best friend who I've known forever. Like we grew up together. Our parents are friends. He roomed together in college, roomed together in Chicago, stood up in each other's weddings. Like as good a friend as you can have. I could just remember this time I was talking to him about how I hoped there was a check in the mail on Monday because I needed to make payroll on Wednesday. And I could just tell, like, my friend didn't get it. Like he worked for Bank of America and the check just always arrived. And so it was like very lonely, right? Like you don't have anybody who else you can gel with. And so what I find about EO is that we can talk about imposter syndrome and payroll stress and loneliness at the top and this all consuming desire to grow things. And one of the reasons that we do that is there's confidentiality. So like you can talk to me like about the biggest problem you're having in your business, and I feel totally the same as you because it's not going to get out. It's not going to spread out.
Yeah.
And you'll probably have some general sentiment about what I'm going through. And so that's confidentiality allows us to go really deep and allows us to get those kind of communication I'm talking about. Again, in EO, we don't talk about the weather. It's like we talk about more important things. So, the other rule that we have is called Gestalt or foreign mindset. So what that means is that I would never tell you like, hey, Prateek, I think you should take out a loan, or my advice is you should fire that employee. What I might say is I've had a similar experience and here's the steps that I took and how I went about it. And so I love that. I think it's actually good for my life too. But the idea is if I start giving you advice, there's a big me talking to a little you, or vice versa, a big you talking to a little me. What we try to do with Gestalt Power Mindset with experience sharing is we're peers. We're on the same level. And here's my experience, take it or leave it. And so those rules are really valuable and it makes for a positive experience. The other thing about EO that's different, it's not really, so many of these business groups are about like generating business from other members. It's sort of like I'll send you referrals, you send me referrals.
Yeah.
Let's keep track of that. And there's pressure to deliver on that and everything like that. I don't really I have like one or two clients in EO and I didn't even try. It was just sort of something that happened. And I think it's been way, way more valuable to get the skills and the experience. My business is really, I mean, like, I don't know, 8 or 9x since I've joined EO, and I do attribute a lot of success to what we did. And I've been in for 5 years, so that's a pretty good run.
Yeah.
And I barely made it into EO, and then now we'll be like 9 million this year, something like that. And so it's like it's been an amazing run. More than anything, though, that's the program, that's the tactics. What I would tell you is I found like a group of people who are just like me. And so that the amount of people who you talk to and you go like, hey, were you pretty smart, but you struggled in school? Yeah, that was me. Were you, kind of a hustler, loved to make money any way you could when you were a kid? Yeah, that was me. I think there's a certain type of person who just, they decide not to conform at a young age. And then there's people like my daughter conforms, like she's really, school is perfect for her.
Yeah.
I kind of decided at some age, like I'm not going to conform. And then you take those two lives 20 years later, we're in very different places. And
I see that.
So when you meet a bunch of people who made that same decision with you and they have the same sort of like butterfly effect of a life, it's really cool because you feel less alone. And it just, I like what they're doing. They're doing positive things. They're not, they're not just like wasting away. They're trying to make a difference. And generally the EOers are, it's not even about their business so much. Like they're trying to get better at being a husband or being a wife or being a friend and being more healthy, whatever. And so, yeah, I could go on and on. I love EO and it's been life-changing for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that said, right? I mean, you've run a bootstrap business now for the last 7 years.
Mhm.
What's the best part of being bootstrapped?
Yeah, I would say here's the thing. So I started a business in 2009. I was
Okay.
25 years old, and we bootstrapped that one too. But I had partners, and
Got it.
so
Okay.
I found that was stifling. That basically being bootstrapped means I don't know anybody anything. I don't need to do. I don't need to run it by anybody. I need to be a good teammate. I need to make sure my
Yeah.
leaders are involved in decision making and that everyone's heard. But on the major issues, I don't get to. Nobody gets to tell me what to do, or
Yeah.
and there's not much debate. So the freedom to run this company the way that I want to is the whole thing. And I felt that I'm like 25 to whatever 32 or so 33. I was an owner of business. I had a ton of autonomy, and it still wasn't enough. Like when I had the partners, you could have a disagreement and not get your way. And
Yeah.
so this has really been the ultimate for me to just be like, I I don't owe anybody anything. I don't have any like I don't, I'm going to call the shots as I see them. And whether it's win, lose, or draw, it's on me. And so
Yeah.
that's been the most enjoyable thing. I think if I take money from somebody, I'm going to answer to them. And so I don't like that. So I just want to be able to run it my way. I want to have the culture I want to have. And that may sound selfish, but there's a lot of risk at stake when you run a business. It's a lot of your own capital. If I don't get to have the ability to really just do what I want when I want to do it,
Yeah.
the way I want to do it, it's not worth it. It wouldn't be worth it. And so
I see that. Yeah. Yeah.
this makes the risk worthwhile to me. It's harder, it's slower, it's more uh, stressful at times, but you know, I wouldn't trade anything for the freedom. You know.
That's awesome. Mark, I'd love to get your take on hiring, and especially hiring in an agency environment. What are some of the things that you look for, that you found have been just immensely helpful as you've built out your team over these last few years?
So many lessons here. So things what not to do. Um, so to give your listeners some context, we are a remote company. We hire from all over the United States. We don't hire outside the United States, which in 6 months may change, but at least at this time we're all onshore. So we've done a lot of different things. We've tried a lot of different things. One of the biggest takeaways I've had is that assessments are more important than interviews. So
Huh.
if we can actually give someone an assessment, and so we want to know like a personality assessment, like are you actually hardwired to do the job you do? So I would plug a company called Culture Index, which I think is really good at helping me understand like how people are hardwired. And so like I have an awesome VP of sales, like one of the most talented guys I've known. If I made him the accounting person, he wouldn't do well, right? Like he's good at what he does, but
Yeah.
you would be amazed how often people set out on a career and they're really not. They're really doing something they're not hardwired to do, and you could force yourself to do stuff that drains your battery for longer than you think, but eventually it comes back. So really understanding what are people, and I use personality assessments to do that, and that's been a really big game changer. The other thing is I think early in my career I would hire people who were a lot like me, which is
Okay.
they were outgoing and they were not particularly like rule following, because those are the people who interview the best, right? They can talk
Yeah.
well and
Yeah.
they'll say whatever they need to get the job.
Yeah.
Candidly, like salespeople are still that way for me. Like anytime we interview a salesperson, is that way. But really, also, when you get the jobs we need people who are really just like hands on keyboard,
Okay.
knocking out work. We don't need the big extroverted people. And so, hiring a whole bunch of people like me, I was starting to watch people churn out, or we'd look at the assessments of the happiness of our team, and they weren't very happy with the job. And so, little by little, I realized, it's a bias as well. It's just I'm hiring people who are too much like me. They're not hardwired to do the job, and so interviews can be everybody thinks you're good at interviews.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical. I think assessments are better. And the other piece of advice that I would give people, it's a volume game just like anything else. So it's just like leads. Like if you have a
Okay.
lot of people, um, and then you can do a screening process and you get it down to a smaller number of people, that's a lot better. So for us today, it used to be I would do every step of, I'd post the job, I'd read every resume, I would do every first round interview, second round interview, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I barely get them. I mean, our administrative assistant will post the job. She'll screen the applicants. She'll provide the assessment first to see if they're even qualified. Then she'll do the screening interview. Then if they pass the screening interview, they go to a hiring manager. Then they might go to me, right? So
That's
it
cool. Yeah.
becomes this huge time savings for me
Yeah.
to not, everybody I bet on this who's listening to this has had that experience of you start the interview 5 minutes in, you realize there's something, the person can't communicate well, or that they didn't tell the truth on their resume or whatever it is, and you go, am I going to be polite and just hang on for 20 minutes here, or should I just end this now? Like that happens to anybody, right? I think anybody can
Yeah.
understand that. It's much better. Like it's been much easier for me if my administrative assistant is having those phone calls and screening out people than, and not just me, but the hiring manager who bills out a really high rate and has an important job to do. So what we try to do is get a lot of volume, get a ton of applicants, do assessments and screening that's very low effort on the part of our leadership.
Yep.
And then we'll do a skills assessment and then a core values assessment, and then you get hired. And so now, I mean, it has taken us a long time to get there. And
I see that.
we've also had success hiring with recruiters. That's been very valuable too. But I think you pay, right? Like you pay for, you always pay. Either you pay to learn, you pay to create systems, or you pay recruiters. Like take your pick. But I think trying to do this cheap or without good systems, like investing in good systems, from my experience, it has gone sideways.
I see that. Mark, on your website, you say get found in more local searches. What's the pain you're solving and for whom?
Good question. So we work with a specific type of customer. So our clients are basically brick and mortar businesses or businesses that serve a specific geographic area. Think of like the trades.
Okay.
And the reason we did that, it's actually not because we just love that cohort, even though we do. It's really because Google has, to the extent that people know about SEO, they know that Google has this algorithm and we're all trying to understand it.
Yeah.
It's more accurate to say Google has algorithms, plural. And the one that we really know about is called the local algorithm.
Okay.
So when Google detects that you have local intent in your search, they will run it through a local algorithm. And our team is extremely focused on that algorithm. And we provide, industry leading, thought leadership on it. We speak at conferences. We are, often recognized on, top SEOs in the world type stuff for our contributions. But it really is like a niche. So not only am I really interested in that local algorithm, which is basically like most small businesses run through that. And so what don't I do? I don't really work with e-commerce brands. I don't really work with publisher SEO. Very few enterprise clients would make sense for me. And so I'm mostly working with car dealers where we have a huge specialization. So
Amazing.
almost by accident of history, we have become like majority of my clients are now car dealers. Like that's how it's one of these things where it was like it started to go and then it just really went. And I think it's huge. I think having that specialization has been great because we can go, and now we're not just everything to anybody, but we're an expert in something. So we're an expert in this algorithm, and then we're also an expert in this vertical, which is car dealers. So we know the jargon. We get accepted to speak at the conferences.
Yeah.
We create thought leadership for people who are interested in that area. And we're very different from the generalists, right? We're very, very much like specific thing. Now it's starting to get to the point where we're like, we want to grow fast. We're going to have more service offerings. We're going to have to not be. So it kind of comes back. But when I first started, we used to do everything for everybody.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is this is a piece of advice. Coaches were really helpful to me early in my career.
Okay.
So I knew local SEO well, but I was like, I would take everything. I would take. You want a website? I got you. You want to do organic social? I got you. I had a young family, and I was trying to. If your money was green, I was taking it. And my joke. There's still my client, Pequod's Pizza. The owner there was like, Mark, if I asked you to reshingle my roof, you'd say yes, because it was like I'd do anything. And so I started to work with a coach, and the coach really, they start to do this spreadsheet work. They start to do this analysis, and they go, okay, your most profitable clients are these. Your happiest, most the companies that will say the best are these. What do they have in common? You're like, oh, they're all local SEO clients. And so we know this well. We're good at it. Our passion's there. We're doing the best work in that category. And so we got very focused on it.
So how did you, niche down though? Because going back to, like what you said, where in which you, started and like you would do everything. So what was that process of just figuring out, okay, this is what we're really good at? And was there also like a moment where you were like, okay, while this is what we're really good at, we're leaving all this business behind?
100%.
So how did you sort of go through that process?
Yeah, 100%. I had a call this morning where I was like, we're not a good fit. It was like in 2018, me would have been like, oh yeah, we'll figure out a way to, we'll say yes, and then we'll figure out how to do it afterwards. But I was like, you're not a good fit. So we leave money on the table for sure. It was a process. It was really uncomfortable at the beginning. And, you have to, all these things kind of tie together, but I didn't realize it until afterwards. I would be lying to you if I said I did this and it led to this and that. But what ended up happening was I did work with a coach named Noah Weiner who was really helpful to me. And he was pivotal in making me recognize these. He's just good at pattern detection. I was working so hard. I was missing the forest from the trees, right? I was just anything I could do to get some money, I was doing it. And he just kind of said like, well, you're working on clients that you're not even making money. I mean, like you're barely making money.
I see that, yeah.
And so we started to really work on it was the first time, we use this phrase in EOS or NEO, like work on the business, not in the business. It was the first time working with a coach where I really felt like I did that. And it set off a chain reaction of me doing that a lot. Now, mostly I work on my business, not in my business. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was I really had this assumption that I needed to speak at conferences to get massive growth. And I wasn't particularly interesting. Like, why would you put somebody who was a generalist who did everything for everybody on a stage to talk about anything, right? Like I don't have a point of view. I don't have an expertise. There's nothing particularly captivating about me. And so once we kind of realized this, then the next step was like, oh, I think I'm going to talk about local SEO at conferences. That's my expertise. That's what I do. And I'm off. And so then I started to speak at conferences. And then I met people who were really good at speaking at conferences. And now they've come join my team. And so I do less conference speaking than ever. And, but that was the first thing. And I'd be lying to you if I said like, we needed to be in local SEO. So I started to speak at conferences so that I could get Greg Gifford to work for me. It was just like, we just recognized the economics.
Yeah.
Then we figured out, okay, there's a good opportunity here to do marketing for this group. Then from that, I made friends with industry experts, and they eventually came and worked with me. So
That's awesome.
It was. I wish it was a plan, but it just sort of happened. It was fluid, right? Each step, I think I made a good decision, got me an opportunity to get lucky to get another good decision. So
that's awesome. Mark, that said though, in the SEO agency space, which is fairly competitive, how do you differentiate yourself?
The big thing was I had this idea that to get clients, you needed the personalities that generally people don't buy. They can absolutely buy from an agency, and agencies have brands, and we should be careful of that. But generally, the individual brands were very, very popular. And I watched this as when I was trying to learn, I would learn from the personal brands, right? So I was really, really focused on that for some reason, and I thought I would try and make myself a personal brand.
Got it.
But over time, I vividly remember this. Particularly, I went to a conference, and I was kind of lonely, and I missed my family, and I didn't. I could just tell I wanted it bad, but I could tell people wanted it worse than I did. Like I wasn't to their level of desire, not talent, but they wanted it more than me. And I went, this is not good, because this was my plan, was to speak at conferences. Fortunately, at that time in 2019, I got at a conference, I got to meet Greg Gifford, who's very, very well known in local SEO. And he was in between jobs, and he was keynoting a conference that I was just a speaker at. And so I called him and said, would you talk to me about taking a job at SearchLab? And he said, yeah. And then we sat down, and really he didn't start working then, but it feels to me like in my memory, like we started working together from that point on.
Wow.
And so it's been an amazing relationship. He's extremely, like, he probably spoke at 30 conferences last year. And then shortly after that, I have a podcast too called Suds and Search, and I had a guest, Mark Urban, on. So Mark was in 2019. He was PPC Hero's #1 personality in the world in PPC, and he was Microsoft's North American Personality of the Year. So he was coming out this amazing year. When I was interviewing him, the day I was interviewing him, Greg messaged me and said Mark might not show. He just there was a huge layoff at WordStream, and he was involved, so he got wrapped up in it. I talked to him on the day he got laid off, which was like such a lucky break. And so I talked to him. I thought he was hilariously funny, and I couldn't go to sleep. And so I messaged Greg at like 1:00 in the morning. I was like, we should hire Mark to come work with us too. And he like messaged back. It was like, you're not getting him. Like, you're lucky you got me. And like, you're not Mark Urban. He doesn't work in automotive. He's like, he's going to go for Google or Microsoft. And somehow, like, then Greg saw the show. Then Greg saw the episode we filmed. He goes, I see what you mean. Like, it's worth a conversation. Let's do it. And so one conversation led to 4 to
That's awesome.
a job. And somehow, like, by hook or by crook, we got Mark. So we had these 2 like powerhouse people. And people really came to us for for those personal brands. And then we've added additional. Dane Seville is really well known, or who's our director of brand experience, is really well known in automotive. Probably like just a super talented presenter and thought leader. So that's kind of how we've been able to go. Is we like to say our like 3 uniques are: we have the top talent in the industry, which is like the people who people want their expertise and their knowledge base. Yep. And then we do some things tactically. We have month-to-month contracts, which was different, especially when we started. It's becoming more common now, but people can get out of it. We don't lock people into contracts, which is different. And then we have a low client to consultant ratio. So those are like our 3 uniques that we talk about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So today, though, when it comes to your tactics for growth, besides conferences, what are some of the other things that y'all are doing that is really helping you all to, of course, win new business?
So I think one of the best things to say is our marketing philosophy, everything has to be in this box of education. So if it's not educational, we don't do it. And so more than anything, what I've learned over the years, man, I'll tell you, I tried everything. We grew in the early years, we grew a lot through partnerships. So I would go to every happy hour, every cocktail party, and try and become friends with the IT agency. So they would refer me business, or the web developers, they'd refer me business. And that was very effective but it was time consuming, and it didn't bore as much fruit as conferences. So what we do is we look at everything through, does this have an educational component to it or not? Because we think if we educate people, like we just give it away for free and abundantly, then people will figure out what it is and they'll go, that's too hard. I'm just going to hire these guys. Like
That's so interesting.
and that's really what has happened. So we have I have a PPC department. I have a bunch of, like, I think we have the best PPC department in the world. I love these people, but we spend very little on PPC. We basically spend PPC money on my name, Greg's name, Dane's name, and maybe one other person. We don't do a lot because we just don't see it as like vital to our education. Like it's sort of a performance marketing tactic.
Yeah.
And so every Tuesday, Greg has a video called Local Search Tuesdays where it's a helpful tip video. And it's 3 to 5 minutes. And it's just, here's what's going on. Here's a tip that you could help. And so that's great. We get information from that. I have a podcast, and it's been great to build a brand, my own personal brand. And that comes out on Thursdays. It will launch again in January. And so Dane he's a blogger. He's also got a podcast of his own called More Than You Can Chew. All of our stuff is just education. That's it. And so a lot of these decisions that we make, there are so many choices for what you could do. What could possibly do. What I really like about our team is we look at it from like, okay, what are we going to say no to? And we're going to say no to it. We're going to say no to a lot of things because they don't fit within. We think what we're good at is educating people. And then if we do that, it's a virtuous cycle where they'll come back and either refer us business or become clients of ours. And so when doesn't fit into that category, it's just not for us.
That's awesome. I think that I read somewhere in which it was like, the more that you give out for free, people just start, I think, looking at it differently, and they're like, hey, these are the people that I want to work with, because there's just so much value that I'm getting from just these snippets of content, for example, that I just want to have a conversation.
Yeah,
and that tends to get to new business.
I couldn't agree more. And a friend of ours, Sean Rains, I would point to, he had a post on LinkedIn about Greg specifically. Just yesterday. It was really good. And he captured it so well. But people get worried about stuff that they don't need to get worried about. Like they'll be like, hey, if I give away all my secrets, they don't have to work with me. They can just do it themselves. And you're like, well, if your business is that easy, should you really be charging a lot of money for it? I don't know. Like, you shouldn't probably be charging a zillion dollars for it. Yeah. But if it's really technical and it takes, the esoteric points matter. You can just share freely. I mean, there's nothing to it. We learn as well. So we have a core value to have a thirst for learning at SearchLab. And so we want our team to be digesting information from the industry as well. Susan Yen is speaking at Brighton SEO as I speak. And so she's like an up and coming speaker. And that's what it comes down to. Is just like, give it away. People, if it's a hard service to do. So people are going to read all this and be like, oh, that makes sense. Man, this is too hard. I'm going to just hire you guys to do it. You've been so cool to give this information away. And, and maybe, and if they don't, you've helped some people out. The good stuff's going to come back to you, but doing nothing's not a strategy, and being guarded and not sharing your best secrets isn't very interesting, So the only thing that's interesting is if you give it away, and we're all fighting for attention. And, so you got to give away your best stuff. If your business is so easily to replicate that, just watching your tip video would give it away. I'm like suspicious that that's not much of a business, right? Like that's not much of a service.
I see that. Yeah.
And so ours is complex enough where it's interesting. Greg's controversial. He says things that he uses bad language. He's got tattoos and a beard. Like he doesn't look like out of central casting. He's dynamic. He's interesting, and he is absolutely passionate about what we do. And
that's awesome.
It's just infectious. And so people will gravitate toward him into SearchLab because of that approach.
That's awesome. Mark, everyone has scrappy stories, right? I mean, while building their business, what's the scrappiest story you have?
Couple of examples. So I'll tell you, like, this is like the worst one I have is this predates all of the all of the, kind of famous people I have on my team now. But early on, we just hired. We had nothing. We didn't have anything. You couldn't even give you health insurance. It was like, very low salaries, very long hours, beer Fridays, and a positive attitude every day were really all we had to offer. And so, I hear this a lot from people who talk to entrepreneurs. They go, just hire the best people. And it's kind of like, it's hard when you have no money.
Yeah. Yeah.
they have
I
money.
see
So we were putting some pieces together. One of the hacks that I had, this show's about growth. And one of the hacks I had was in my first agency, we were involved in this transfer of dollars from print media over to digital media.
Okay.
And so what we did was we found all the people who were salespeople for Yellow Pages, for Chicago Tribune, for Northwest Indiana Times. And we said, we paid them a lot of commission to transfer their their clients over to us. And it went pretty well. Like it was a good strategy. And when I got to SearchLab, I just ran the same play, right? I just had, and so one person in particular who founded the company with me, wasn't an owner, but was like, it definitely had a co-founder title. And it went well until it didn't, So if you start to have core values and a purpose, cause, and passion, and you're trying to really run a business, this became murky, right? It became an issue. So eventually we had to part ways with that person. It was very ugly. I worked with him for a while, and at my first agency in this one. And I thought we were going to lose a lot of clients because they had relationships with them. And actually we lost like no clients. We lost his brother was a client, and that was the only client I lost. And so it went great. And then around February of 2019, so like Valentine's Day of 2019, I had a lunch meeting with a client. We had started to see churn in our business, and more than we had ever seen. And so I was sitting down with this client, and he showed me a text message, and he said, "You need to be prepared. Your co-founder is back hunting," and he said he's got a team. And I said, "That's funny. I've noticed we had some churn." So I went down to, we had an office in Northwest Indiana. I went down to Northwest Indiana. The office was very weird. There were like people in there that I didn't recognize. And I kind of figured it out that this cohort from Northwest Indiana. So we had started to back up the story. We had started to do EOS. We started to identify low performers on the team, people who are not doing well. And so this kind of Northwest Indiana cohort was kind of coming up. I'll put it that way. As not really like, what are they doing? They're kind of playing house all day. And so I went in there and I realized what was going on very quickly. Basically, my former partner had gotten these people on board, and they were going to be his delivery people. And I got more cancellations that day. They handed in resignation that day. So the two gentlemen there handed in their resignation that day, and we lost something like $400,000 of recurring revenue. We lost clients. We lost clients that didn't even go with them, but just didn't want to be. They thought it was a circus.
Part of the situation, yeah.
Yeah, they thought it was a circus. Like, this is crazy. I'm just like, pox on both your houses. And so it was bad. So that was a awful feeling. Really felt like betrayed. And I went to everybody who was left on the team. I told them exactly what had happened. We started to figure out, pretty quickly what happened there, right? So like what their company name, what was going on, and we obviously had tons of problems with the clients that they were working on, and so we dug out of it. 2019, it ended up being a very good year, sort of a flat year, but I think a very good year considering we took on water early in the year. And then later that year, I joined EO and I hired Greg in the same year, and we've been on a rocket ship ever since. So I'm very happy to report that the fastest we ever grew was the period of time right before those guys in Indiana started and shortly after they started, and then almost immediately after they left. So it was like right people in the right seats is really very, very important.
That's amazing. Wow. Mark, this has been such a fun conversation. I have so many more questions for you, but I know we're at time. I'd love to learn what's next for you and what's next for the business.
We'll see. I'm really I like what I do. I have people who are smart and challenging, and so I really like working with my leadership team. For us, what we're interested in is we're pursuing an acquisition plan. So we've never acquired an agency before or another business, and so in 2025 we've like stored up the capital to do it. It's responsible now. It's been planned out, and we're looking to bolt on agencies to SearchLab in the next year. So
That'd be
it should
so
be
cool.
pretty cool. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll report back next time to see if we can actually be successful with it. It's the right amount of like opportunity, risk, and you know, kind of all the things I enjoy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Mark, how can folks keep up with you?
Best way is, I'm on Twitter at Bealin is my Twitter handle. I periodically post on LinkedIn, but not as much as I should. And then the best way is to follow Local Search Tuesdays and Suds and Search, and more than you can choose. So all the programming for our website, which can be found at searchlabdigital.com.
Sounds good. Mark, thank you once again for your time today. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Prateek. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. All right.